During the Great Depression, church communities turned hardship into ingenuity, creating simple, delicious meals from almost nothing. These recipes weren't just about survival. They became timeless comfort foods, ready to uncover the resourceful dishes that fed a nation. Poor man's steak. Poor man's steak was a Depression-era innovation that transformed a small amount of ground beef into a hearty, satisfying meal. By mixing the meat with cracker crumbs or oatmeal, shaping it into a steak, and browning it in a skillet, families could stretch their limited resources while still enjoying the taste of a traditional beef dinner. Church cookbooks from the 1930s frequently featured variations, with the First Baptist Church of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, popularizing a version in their 1933 community cookbook. The key to its rich flavor was the simple yet savory gravy made from milk, flour, and pan drippings, which turned an economical meal into a comforting favorite. Poor man's steak fed an entire family on just a pound of ground beef, often served with mashed potatoes to absorb every drop of gravy. This dish embodies the ingenuity of the era, proving that creativity in the kitchen could make even the humblest ingredients feel special. Hoover Stew. Named ironically after President Herbert Hoover, who was blamed for the economic collapse, this budget-friendly dish became a staple in church soup kitchens across America. It was designed to feed large numbers of people with inexpensive, widely available ingredients, making it a lifeline for struggling families. The Salvation Army developed one of the most widely used versions around 1932, featuring sliced hot dogs, macaroni, canned tomatoes, and whatever vegetables were on hand, such as onions or canned corn. Because of its flexible nature, the dish could be adapted based on available ingredients. Some cooks substituted beans for meat, used different pasta shapes, or added any donated vegetables. The simplicity and scalability of Hoover Stew made it an essential meal for church-run relief efforts. The First Baptist Church of Detroit famously served Hoover Stew twice a week throughout 1933, providing more than 15,000 meals to unemployed workers and their families. Potato soup. Potato soup was the ultimate Depression-era comfort food, built on the affordability and versatility of potatoes. Church communities across America relied on this simple yet nourishing dish to stretch their food supplies while still providing warmth and sustenance. The basic recipe, potatoes, onions, water, and a touch of milk or butter if available, could be adapted based on what a household had. The Methodist Women's Auxiliary in rural Minnesota shared a 1932 recipe stating, "A pot of potato soup can feed 12 hungry souls for less than $1. Families added whatever they could, leftover ham bones for flavor, wild onions for extra taste, and even potato peels to maximize nutrition." Served at community meals and church gatherings, potato soup was a lifeline during hard times. Today, it remains a beloved dish, often enhanced with cheese, bacon, or herbs, luxuries that would have been rare during the Depression. Water pie. Water pie is a Depression-era marvel, turning the simplest pantry staples into a surprisingly rich dessert. With milk, fruit, and nuts often out of reach, church communities across the South embraced this ingenious recipe, perfect for bake sales and community gatherings. First documented in the 1931 fundraising cookbook of the First Presbyterian Church of Memphis, water pie starts with a basic pastry crust filled with a mixture of water, sugar, flour, butter, and vanilla. Once baked, these humble ingredients transform into a custard-like filling with a delicate sweetness. Church events frequently featured water pie due to its affordability. One Oklahoma minister's wife was famous for bringing 6 water pies to every function, feeding dozens for just pennies. Dandelion Salad. Dandelion Salad showcases the Depression-era ingenuity of turning wild greens into nourishing meals. Church communities played a key role in teaching families to forage, with dandelions being among the most accessible, and vitamin-rich options. The Lutheran Ladies' Aid Society in Pennsylvania Dutch country published a widely shared recipe in 1934, advising members to gather young dandelion greens before flouring for the best flavor. The greens were then dressed with a warm bacon dressing made from drippings, vinegar, sugar, and sometimes a hard-boiled egg. Church picnics in early spring often featured dandelion salads, providing a much-needed fresh vegetable after winter's scarcity. Children were sent to collect the greens, learning firsthand how to make the most of nature's bounty. Today, modern nutritionists praise dandelion greens as superfoods, something Depression-era families already knew by necessity. Vinegar pie. Vinegar pie stands as a testament to Depression-era resourcefulness, mimicking the tartness of fruit pies when fresh produce was unavailable. This clever dessert became a staple at church socials and fundraisers, offering a satisfying treat with minimal ingredients. The First Methodist Church of Springfield, Illinois, featured a beloved vinegar pie recipe in its 1930 community cookbook, calling it a pie for when the apple barrel is empty. Made from sugar, eggs, a touch of vinegar, often apple cider, butter, and warm spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, it created a custard-like filling with a subtle tang. Church gatherings often relied on vinegar pies, especially in winter and early spring when fruit was scarce. Their long shelf life made them ideal for preparing in advance. Despite its humble origins, vinegar pie became a cherished comfort food, proving that even the simplest ingredients could produce something delicious. Did your grandparents or parents ever make any of these dishes? What's your favorite memory of them? Wacky Cake. Wacky Cake, also known as Crazy Cake or Depression Cake, was a brilliant solution for families who wanted a sweet treat despite the scarcity of eggs, milk, and butter during the Great Depression. This inventive dessert became a church kitchen favorite, appearing frequently at bake sales, potlucks, and community gatherings. The Women's Auxiliary of Grace Episcopal Church in Cleveland was among the first to document the recipe in their 1933 fundraising cookbook, helping to spread its popularity. What made Wacky Cake unique was its unconventional ingredient list and method. Instead of traditional leavening agents, vinegar and baking soda worked together to create a light, fluffy texture. Vegetable oil replaced butter and cocoa powder, provided a rich chocolate flavor. The ingredients were mixed directly in the baking pan, saving both time and dishwashing, a practical advantage when even soap was a luxury. Church events often featured Wacky Cake because it was quick to prepare, inexpensive, and consistently delicious. Sunday school teachers frequently baked it for children's gatherings, ensuring a special treat without breaking the budget. Ham and bean soup. Ham and bean soup perfectly embodies the resourcefulness of Depression-era cooking, where a small amount of meat was stretched to nourish entire families. Churches across America relied on this hearty, protein-packed soup for community meals, potlucks, and food relief efforts. The Ladies' Aid Society of the First Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri, featured a widely shared recipe in their 1931 community cookbook, noting that a single ham bone with just a little meat clinging to it can flavor enough soup to feed 20 hungry souls. This simple yet satisfying dish was built around dried beans, typically Navy or Great Northern, soaked overnight to soften and extend their yield. A ham bone or small scraps of ham provided smoky depth, while onions, carrots, or potatoes were added when available. Church kitchens often had enormous pots of ham and bean soup simmering throughout the winter, ready to serve anyone in need. The slow cooking process coaxed every ounce of flavor from the ham bone, creating a thick, comforting broth despite minimal ingredients. Dried beans made this soup particularly practical, as they were affordable, nutritious, and could be stored indefinitely. Even after the Depression ended, ham and bean soup remained a staple in church kitchens, securing its place as a beloved American comfort food. Peanut butter bread. Church communities embraced this simple, hearty bread as a way to ensure children received adequate nutrition despite financial hardships. The recipe first appeared in the 1932 Five Roses Flour Cookbook, but spread rapidly through church recipe exchanges. The First Presbyterian Women's Circle of Des Moines adapted a widely shared version, stating it was especially good for growing children's lunch pails. This no-yeast, quick bread relied on pantry staples: flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, and peanut butter, with milk or even water used in the toughest times. Despite its simplicity, the bread delivered a satisfying, slightly sweet and nutty flavor, making it a hit at church bake sales and a staple in food relief baskets. Its dense texture made it ideal for spreading with jam or honey, further stretching scarce ingredients. Beyond its taste, peanut butter bread's real value was its nutritional content. At a time when meat was a luxury, the peanut butter provided much-needed protein and healthy fats, ensuring children and families stayed nourished. Church supper casserole. Church supper casserole became a Depression-era staple, offering an affordable, flexible way to feed large groups with whatever ingredients were on hand. This hearty dish was a fixture in church fellowship halls across America, where congregations gathered for communal meals despite financial hardships. The Women's Missionary Union of First Baptist Church in Oklahoma City developed a widely shared version in 1934, which spread throughout Southern Baptist churches as an economical and satisfying meal. The base of the casserole typically consisted of cooked macaroni, canned tomatoes, and a protein source, sometimes ground meat stretched with breadcrumbs, canned beans, or even just extra vegetables when meat was unavailable. What made the dish invaluable was its adaptability. Church cooks could incorporate leftover rice, potatoes, or any available vegetables, ensuring that no food went to waste. To enhance flavor and texture, a topping of breadcrumbs mixed with saved bacon grease was added before baking, creating a golden, crispy crust. Church supper casserole became a symbol of resilience and community, demonstrating how resourcefulness could transform humble ingredients into a comforting meal. Even after the Depression, it remained a beloved dish at church gatherings, potlucks, and fundraising dinners, celebrated for its affordability and versatility. Egg drop soup. Egg drop soup became a lifesaver for many struggling families during the Depression, offering an inexpensive yet nourishing meal when meat was scarce. Eggs remained one of the most accessible protein sources, especially in rural communities where families raised backyard chickens. Recognizing the need for simple, cost-effective meals, the Women's Guild of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Chicago's immigrant neighborhoods adapted a version of traditional Chinese egg drop soup using basic ingredients: homemade chicken broth, often simmered from bones or scraps, eggs, and occasionally a bit of green onion or cornstarch for thickening. Church-led cooking demonstrations frequently showcased egg drop soup as a practical way to stretch a few ingredients into a satisfying meal. One parish priest in Philadelphia famously remarked, "With this soup, a family of 4 can have protein for pennies a day." The technique was simple, but effective. Beaten eggs were slowly drizzled into simmering broth, forming delicate ribbons that gave the soup body and texture. Often served with a slice of bread, this humble yet nutritious dish exemplified Depression-era ingenuity, turning meager resources into something warm, comforting, and filling. Tomato soup cake. Tomato soup cake may sound unusual today, but during the Great Depression, it was a brilliant way to create a flavorful dessert without expensive ingredients. Fresh fruit was often too costly for cakes, so resourceful bakers turned to canned tomato soup for moisture, acidity, and a subtle depth of flavor. The Methodist Women's Circle of Lansing, Michigan, included a version in their 1936 community cookbook, declaring it impossible to detect the secret ingredient. This Depression-era spice cake combined pantry staples like flour, sugar, lard, or oil, and warm spices such as cinnamon and cloves. Baking soda reacted with the acidity in the tomato soup, creating a surprisingly light and moist texture. The result was a cake reminiscent of carrot cake, but without the need for costly ingredients. Church bake sales often featured tomato soup cake, sometimes frosted with cream cheese icing when available, or simply dusted with sugar. Campbell's tomato soup, being affordable and shelf-stable, made this recipe a practical favorite for special occasions. Please comment 1 to let me know you'll be watching this video until the end. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Creamed chipped beef on toast, often called SOS by military servicemen, was a Depression-era staple that found a home at church breakfasts and suppers across America. The Lutheran Aid Society of Milwaukee featured a detailed recipe in their 1934 community cookbook, describing it as satisfying fare for hungry families. This dish made use of dried beef, a shelf-stable and inexpensive protein, which was rehydrated and rinsed to remove excess salt. A simple white sauce, made from flour, fat, and milk, transformed the beef into a creamy, hearty mixture that was then ladled over slices of homemade toast. Church kitchens prepared large batches for men's prayer breakfasts and evening meals for struggling families. Rural congregations, in particular, embraced the recipe, as many farm families still had access to milk even during the hardest times. The appeal of creamed chipped beef lay in its ability to stretch a small amount of meat into a filling meal, demonstrating the ingenuity of Depression-era cooking. Corn chowder. Corn chowder became a beloved staple at church suppers during the Depression, particularly in rural communities where homegrown corn was a vital food source. This simple yet hearty soup transformed humble ingredients into a nourishing meal that could feed a crowd. The Women's Fellowship of the Congregational Church in rural Iowa published a well-regarded recipe in 1933, stating that a little salt pork and some corn can warm both body and spirit in winter's darkest days. Their version featured corn, whether fresh, canned, or rehydrated from dried kernels, combined with potatoes, onions, and a small amount of salt pork for flavor. Everything simmered together in water, and if milk was available, it was added for a richer texture. Monthly church suppers often showcased large kettles of corn chowder, served alongside homemade biscuits or cornbread. The soup's enduring appeal came from its adaptability. Families could omit the salt pork when meat was scarce, or use only water when milk was unavailable. This flexibility made corn chowder a Depression-era lifeline, embodying the resourcefulness that allowed communities to thrive despite economic hardship. Bread pudding. Bread pudding embodied the waste-nothing mindset of the Depression, turning stale bread into a comforting dessert that no family could afford to overlook. Church communities embraced it as both a practical family dish and a staple at large gatherings. The Episcopal Church Women of Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia, featured a cherished recipe in their 1932 cookbook, calling it the alchemy that turns yesterday's bread into today's comfort. Their version soaked stale bread in a mixture of milk, sugar, cinnamon, and eggs when available, or substituted applesauce when they weren't. A handful of raisins, if affordable, added a touch of sweetness. Large pans of bread pudding often appeared at church events, especially after communion services, repurposing leftover bread with respect. The dish's lasting significance lay in its practicality. It could be made ahead, served warm or cold, and softened even the hardest bread crusts into something satisfying. Many struggling families received day-old bread from church relief programs, and bread pudding transformed that necessity into a beloved treat, proving that even the simplest ingredients could bring comfort in hard times. Chow-Chow Relish. Chow-Chow Relish was a Depression-era staple, transforming surplus garden vegetables into a tangy, flavorful condiment that brightened otherwise plain meals. This mixed vegetable pickle ensured that summer's bounty lasted through the lean months, with recipes varying by region and available produce. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union across the South played a key role in popularizing chow-chow, with a notable recipe appearing in the 1935 Community Cookbook from First Baptist Church of Charlotte, North Carolina. Their version combined cabbage, green tomatoes, onions, peppers, and cucumbers in a vinegar brine seasoned with mustard seeds and turmeric. Church canning circles gathered during peak harvest to prepare large batches, often using church kitchens equipped for bulk processing. These canning days not only preserved food, but also fostered community bonds and supported church relief efforts. Chow-Chow's true value lay in its ability to elevate simple Depression-era meals. A spoonful added zest to a plate of beans, livened up a modest sandwich, or made plain cornbread feel heartier. It was a prime example of resourcefulness, turning garden leftovers into an essential addition to the pantry. Cabbage with hot bacon dressing. Cabbage with hot bacon dressing was a Depression-era favorite, transforming an inexpensive vegetable into a flavorful, satisfying dish. Especially beloved in German Lutheran communities across Pennsylvania and the Midwest, it became a staple at church suppers. St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne featured a version in their 1933 recipe collection, reflecting its deep roots in traditional cooking. The dish involved wilting shredded cabbage with a tangy, slightly sweet dressing made from a small amount of bacon, or just the drippings, vinegar, sugar, and sometimes a beaten egg for added richness. Served warm, the dressing slightly softened the cabbage while keeping a bit of crunch. Cabbage's affordability, long shelf life, and nutritional value made it an essential ingredient during the Depression. The minimal use of bacon ensured that even a small amount went a long way, making this dish a prime example of resourceful, budget-friendly cooking that turned simple ingredients into something special. Milk toast. Church communities often recommended it for the sick, elderly, and very young, as it was easy to digest and required only basic ingredients. The Women's Christian Temperance Union featured a recipe in their 1931 household guide, calling it a dish that sustains body and spirit when nothing else can be afforded. The preparation was simple. Toasted homemade bread, lightly buttered if possible, with warm milk poured over it. Depending on availability, a sprinkle of salt, sugar, or cinnamon added a touch of flavor. Church visiting committees frequently prepared milk toast for shut-ins and ill congregation members since it could be made with minimal effort and common household staples. For families with a cow, milk toast provided a way to stretch this valuable resource into a full meal. Its combination of protein, carbohydrates, and calcium made it a practical and comforting dish, embodying the ingenuity of Depression-era cooks who created sustenance from the simplest ingredients. Do you know of any other Great Depression recipes that should be on this list? Share them below. Potato pancakes. Church communities across various ethnic traditions shared their versions, with the Ladies' Aid Society of St. John's Lutheran Church in Wisconsin publishing a German-inspired recipe in 1934, noting that 3 potatoes can become a meal for 4 when prepared this way. The simple recipe called for grated raw potatoes mixed with a small amount of flour, an egg if available, or water if not, and onions, then fried in saved fat until crispy. Potato pancakes were a staple at church meals, especially in Eastern European and German communities. Catholic parishes often served them on Fridays as a meatless yet filling alternative to fish. Their value during the Depression lay in their adaptability. Requiring just one main ingredient, they could be enjoyed alone, or, when possible, with applesauce or sour cream. The crispy texture and savory flavor made this economical dish feel like a treat, proving that even the most basic foods could be transformed into something special. Mock apple pie. Mock apple pie was one of the most ingenious culinary creations of the Depression era, delivering the taste and texture of apple pie without using a single apple. When fruit was too expensive for many families, this clever substitute allowed them to enjoy a familiar dessert. The recipe spread widely through church cookbooks, with the Presbyterian Women's Circle of Topeka, Kansas, publishing a version in 1932 that claimed, "None will guess the secret ingredient." The filling consisted of Ritz, crackers, or similar alternatives, soaked in a syrup of sugar, water, cream of tartar, and lemon juice, which remarkably mimicked the flavor and texture of baked apples. Mock apple pies became a staple at church bake sales, often surprising diners who had no idea they weren't eating real fruit. The recipe's popularity led Ritz to print it on their packaging in 1934, though church communities had been sharing versions long before. More than just an economical solution, mock apple pie provided a sense of normalcy and comfort, proving that even in hard times, creativity could keep traditions alive. Bean patties. With meat beyond many families' budgets, church communities embraced these economical alternatives, often featuring them at congregation meals. The Missionary Society of the First Methodist Church in Chicago included a widely shared recipe in their 1933 economy cookbook, stating, "These patties satisfy the desire for meat at a fraction of the cost." Their version mashed cooked navy beans with onion, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, then fried the mixture into crisp, hearty patties. Often served with simple gravy or tomato sauce, bean patties became a staple in working-class parishes where meat had become a rare luxury. Their high protein content and satisfying texture made them a valuable source of nourishment, embodying the resourcefulness that helped families stay fed during difficult times. Cornmeal mush. Church relief programs often distributed cornmeal and taught ways to prepare it, making it a versatile and essential dish. A rural Methodist circuit rider circulated a 1932 recipe card calling cornmeal mush the staff of life when wheat bread cannot be afforded. The basic recipe simmered cornmeal in water with salt, creating a porridge that could be eaten hot with milk and sugar for breakfast, or cooled, sliced, and fried for dinner. Church kitchens demonstrated various preparations to prevent monotony, served sweet for breakfast, paired with beans or greens for dinner, or fried with onion for a heartier meal. Onion sandwiches. The United Methodist Women of rural Georgia featured a version in their 1932 pamphlet, Feeding Families in Hard Times, advising, "Slice sweet onions thin, soak in cold water to remove sharpness, then place between buttered bread with salt and pepper." When butter was unavailable, lard or drippings served as substitutes. Church picnics sometimes featured these sandwiches, especially in early spring when storage onions were among the few vegetables left and fresh spring onions were just emerging. Children often foraged for wild greens like chickweed to add extra nutrition. What made onion sandwiches particularly valuable was their ability to provide both substance and bold flavor at a time when meats and cheeses were out of reach. The crisp bite and sweet, sharp taste of onions turned this humble sandwich into a surprisingly satisfying meal. Mayonnaise cake. Mayonnaise cake was a Depression-era baking breakthrough, using mayonnaise as a substitute for eggs and butter to create a moist, tender chocolate cake. Church bake sales frequently featured this inventive dessert, proving that resourcefulness could still yield indulgence. The first Christian church, Women's Circle of Des Moines, included a version in their 1935 fundraising cookbook, calling it Miracle Cake and stating, "None will believe it begins with mayonnaise." Their recipe blended flour, sugar, cocoa powder, water, and mayonnaise into a surprisingly rich batter, bypassing the need for expensive dairy ingredients. Church gatherings often served mayonnaise cake at celebrations, allowing families to enjoy a homemade treat despite limited resources. Sunday school teachers favored it for children's events, as the recipe reliably produced a soft, flavorful cake. Pinto beans and cornbread. Pinto beans and cornbread were the Depression-era equivalent of fast food, cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. Church communities across the South and Southwest perfected this simple meal, turning minimal ingredients into satisfying nourishment. The Baptist Women's Missionary Union of Oklahoma included a detailed recipe in their 1934 collection, stating, "A pot of beans and a pan of cornbread can satisfy a family for pennies a day." The beans were slow simmered with salt and, if available, a piece of salt pork, while the cornbread required only cornmeal, salt, water, and a bit of lard or bacon drippings. Church fellowship halls frequently served this meal at community gatherings and fundraisers, with beans and cornbread suppers becoming common events. More than just a budget-friendly dish, this combination provided complete nutrition, protein and fiber from the beans, with cornbread offering complementary amino acids and carbohydrates. Sustaining millions through economic hardship, it remains a beloved comfort food today. What made mayonnaise cake particularly valuable was its clever repurposing of a common pantry staple into a baking ingredient, proving that with creativity, even the most unexpected substitutions could result in something truly special.
What pioneers ate on the Oregon Trail? Welcome to Who Remember. Have you ever wondered what it took to cross 2,000 miles in a covered wagon with only the supplies you could carry? The Oregon Trail was a journey of hardship and resilience, where pioneers faced hunger, disease, and the vast unknown. But they also found ingenious ways to survive, from baking bread with bacteria to fueling their fires with buffalo dung. Join us as we explore the fascinating food history of the Oregon Trail and discover the surprising meals that kept these pioneers alive. Life on the Oregon Trail. Picture this, it's the mid-1800s, and you're part of a massive westward movement, hundreds of thousands strong, heading towards Oregon on a network of trails known as the Oregon Trail. This 2,200-mile journey wasn't for the faint of heart, as it meant crossing prairies, deserts, and mountains in a covered wagon. While the main route led to Oregon City, some folks branched off to settle in places like California or Utah. But for about 6 months out of the year, wagon trains could be seen snaking their way westward, filled with families, farmers, miners, and ranchers, all hoping for a new life. These pioneers, often called immigrants at the time, had a tough routine. Each day started before sunrise, around 4 a.m., with the essential task of building a fire. This fire wasn't just for warmth. It was the heart of their breakfast. A typical morning meal for these travelers consisted of bacon for protein and fat, alongside hoe cakes or Johnny cakes, simple cornmeal cakes that provided much-needed carbohydrates. And of course, no pioneer breakfast would be complete without a strong cup of coffee to fuel the day's journey. These simple foods were vital for survival, providing the energy and sustenance needed to tackle the challenges of the trail ahead. Johnny cakes. Let's dive deeper into one of the staples of the pioneer diet, the Johnny cake. This simple cornmeal cake was a favorite throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, going by various names like hoe cakes, Indian meal cakes, or Indian corn cakes. A great resource for understanding how these were made comes from the Farmer and Emigrant's Handbook, published in 1856. Josiah T. Marshall, the author, provides a straightforward recipe reflecting what pioneers likely ate on the Oregon Trail. Johnny Cake's recipe. Let's get cooking and recreate a classic pioneer breakfast, Johnny cakes and bacon. Here's what you'll need: 2 cups of fine cornmeal, 1 tablespoon of molasses for a touch of sweetness, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and some boiling water. You'll also need some grease for the pan, and the best way to get that, just like the pioneers did, is by frying up some bacon first. This not only provides the grease but also infuses the Johnny cakes with a delicious smoky flavor. So, start by cooking your bacon to your liking and set it aside, leaving the bacon grease in the pan. Now, In a bowl, combine the cornmeal, molasses, salt, and butter, working them together with your hands until well mixed. Next, gradually pour in the boiling water while stirring with a spoon. The amount of water you add determines the consistency of your Johnny cakes. For a firmer cake, use about 3/4 of a cup. For a softer cake, add a bit more. The original recipe isn't overly precise about the wetness, but it does mention smoothing the top, so avoid making it too runny. Now, shape the dough into round cakes with your hands. Heat the bacon grease in the pan and carefully place the cakes in. Unlike pancakes, Johnny cakes don't form bubbles to signal when they're ready to flip, so you'll have to rely on visual cues. It typically takes about 3 minutes per side, but adjust the cooking time depending on the heat of your pan and the thickness of the cakes. Once both sides are golden brown, your Johnny cakes are ready to be served alongside the crispy bacon. Enjoy this simple yet satisfying meal, just like the pioneers did on their westward journey. Packing essentials, food hacks, and the pitfalls of overpacking. In addition to the staple foods, many pioneers brought along a milk cow for fresh milk and butter, and chickens for a supply of eggs. This added valuable nutrition and variety to their diet. To keep these provisions organized and secure, they packed them in barrels or commonly in stackable provision boxes. These boxes served a dual purpose, acting as storage containers and makeshift furniture, doubling as chairs or tables when needed. Ingenious, right? Now you might be wondering how they kept perishable items like bacon and lard from spoiling without refrigeration. Well, the pioneers had a clever trick. They packed these items inside barrels of flour or cornmeal, shielding them from the sun and preserving them for most of the journey. Pretty resourceful. Of course, food wasn't the only necessity. Pioneers also needed cooking utensils, typically including a frying pan, a Dutch oven for baking and stewing, a kettle or coffee pot for hot beverages, and tin plates and cups for eating. Some even brought reflector ovens, which used the heat from a fire to bake things like cakes and pies. However, the golden rule for packing was less is more. One experienced pioneer, who had made the journey before, mocked those who overpacked, bringing excessive amounts of food and unnecessary items. He described them loading up with every conceivable gimcrack and useless article, from pins and needles to ox shoes, musical instruments, and fancy clothes. Much of this excess baggage ended up abandoned along the trail within the first few weeks, a testament to the importance of packing wisely for the arduous journey. What surprised you most about the foods pioneers ate on the Oregon Trail? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hunting, gathering on the trail. Now, the food packed in those wagons wasn't the only source of sustenance for the pioneers. Remember, they were walking most of those 15 to 20 miles each day because riding in the bumpy, shockless wagons was far from comfortable. All that walking burned a lot of calories, making it essential to find extra food along the way. In the early years of the trail, there weren't any shops or trading posts. But by the 1850s, forts like Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie offered stores where pioneers could restock or replace broken items. However, these stores often had limited supplies and prices were inflated, sometimes 5 times higher than back in Missouri. But hey, when you're in the middle of nowhere, you don't have much choice, right? A more budget-friendly, though more challenging, option was to embrace the ways of their ancestors, hunting and gathering. This sometimes meant literally digging up roots like wild onions, garlic, and camas root. Pioneer Phoebe Judson described how Native Americans relied on camas root, a nutritious bulb, as their staple food. They would steam these bulbs in a pit with hot rocks, then dry them for later use. This, along with game, formed the core of their diet. Fishing was another option, if you had the skills and were near a river. If not, you could always trade for fish, as Phoebe Judson did. She recounts how, at Salmon Falls, they traded sugar for a large salmon, eagerly anticipating a delicious breakfast. But their hopes were dashed when they discovered the fish and a neighbor's dog had vanished overnight. The poor dog had apparently overindulged in the salmon and paid the ultimate price, a harsh reminder of the realities of life on the trail. Let's talk about game meat, a vital source of protein for the pioneers. On the prairies, they could hunt smaller animals like prairie dogs, apparently quite fatty, ducks, rabbits, geese, and sage hens. Sage hen soup with dumplings was a popular dish, though one woman described the taste as being worse than skunk. Thanks to the strong flavor of mountain sage, these smaller animals provided enough for a single meal, but for a longer-lasting supply of meat, they turned to larger game like antelope and, of course, the iconic buffalo. However, even a couple of buffalo provided more meat than a wagon train could eat in one sitting, so they needed a way to preserve it. And that's where jerky comes in. They would cut the meat into strips and hang them on ropes around the wagons, letting the wind dry them as they traveled. One pioneer described the sight of these meat-laden wagons as being decorated with a coarse red fringe. While most people enjoyed buffalo meat, there's a tale of a man who unfortunately got an old bull, and the meat was, shall we say, less than desirable. He described it as tasting like something from the devil's kitchen, utterly offensive and impossible to eat. But such experiences were rare, and buffalo was generally a prized source of food. It's important to note that while the Oregon Trail pioneers hunted for sustenance, others were engaged in a much more destructive practice. Around this time, there was a deliberate and widespread slaughter of buffalo to eliminate the primary food source of the Plains Indians. By 1864, towards the end of the Oregon Trail era, one pioneer sadly observed that while buffalo bones littered the trail, the animals themselves were nowhere to be seen. This needless and wanton slaughter had driven them to near extinction, a tragic consequence of human greed and disregard for the environment. Guidebooks and other practical documents. As the Oregon Trail gained popularity, guidebooks emerged as essential resources for emigrants. One of the earliest and most widely used was Lansford Hastings' The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, 1845, while Mormons relied on William Clayton's The Latter-day Saints' Emigrant's Guide, 1848. These guidebooks, though varying in quality, provided crucial information on distances, grazing areas, river crossings, road conditions, and notable landmarks. Some even offered instructions on building and equipping wagons and selecting suitable draft animals. Guidebooks also provided valuable advice on provisions. Recommended supplies typically included staples like flour, sugar, salt, coffee, tea, baking soda, bacon, dried beans, fruit, cornmeal, and rice. Immigrants could supplement their diets with game hunted along the way, and during the summer months, with wild greens and berries. Many families brought dairy cows to provide fresh milk, and the constant motion of the wagons would churn the milk into butter. A pail of water and a Dutch oven were also essential for cooking in daily life on the trail. Initially, the journey from Independence to the Willamette Valley took 5 to 6 months. However, as the trail became more established, ferries and bridges were built at river crossings, and trading posts and forts sprang up along the route. These improvements shortened travel time by as much as a month. Emigrants could now cross rivers more easily, make repairs conveniently, and even exchange worn-out draft animals for fresh ones, reducing the need for lengthy rest stops. However, these conveniences came at a cost. Tolls were charged for using bridges and ferries, often considered exorbitant by the travelers. Prices for supplies at forts and trading posts were also inflated, leading to resentment towards the merchants who profited from the emigrants' needs. Even itinerant businessmen with freight wagons would follow the wagon trains, offering goods at inflated prices, taking advantage of the pioneers' limited options. These challenges highlight the complex reality of the Oregon Trail experience, where progress and convenience were often accompanied by exploitation and financial burdens. What modern convenience do you think you'd miss the most on the Oregon Trail? Tell us in the comments. The dangers of the journey. The Oregon Trail, while a path to opportunity, was also fraught with danger. While exact numbers are debated, it's estimated that 4 to 10% of those who embarked on the journey perished along the way, with accidents and disease being the biggest threats. Logs from the era frequently mention injuries and deaths caused by accidental shootings, animal encounters, drownings, and hypothermia. Wagon accidents were also common, with children especially vulnerable to falling under the wheels. Disease was rampant due to poor sanitation and limited access to clean drinking water. Cholera, spread through contaminated water, was a major killer, while diphtheria was the leading cause of death among children. Exhaustion and malnutrition weakened the pioneers, making them susceptible to typhoid, mountain fever, a tick-borne illness, dysentery, mosquito-borne diseases like malaria, food poisoning, scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, and even poisoning from alkaline water. Measles, mumps, and smallpox also took their toll, particularly on children, and childbirth posed a constant risk for women. Contrary to popular depictions in Westerns, conflicts with Native Americans were relatively rare during the peak of the Oregon Trail. Historian John Unruh's research suggests that fewer than 400 emigrants were killed in such attacks between 1840 and 1860. In fact, many Native Americans were helpful, providing supplies, operating ferries, and assisting with livestock. While wagon trains often circled their wagons at night, this was primarily to contain livestock, not for defense. However, after the 1850s, as tensions between settlers and Native Americans increased, attacks on smaller, isolated wagon trains became more frequent. Tragically, a significant number of pioneers faced starvation as they neared the end of the trail, having depleted their food supplies. Others arrived exhausted, sick, and destitute, having lost their possessions or the means to pay tolls. Recognizing their plight, Oregonians often organized relief efforts, sending pack trains to meet the newcomers at the Dalles and provide assistance for the final leg of their arduous journey. Legacy of the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail stands as a powerful symbol of westward expansion and the pioneering spirit of the mid-1800s. It was a 2,170-mile lifeline for thousands of families and individuals seeking new beginnings in the West, primarily from the eastern United States. Driven by economic hardship, the allure of free land, and the dream of a better life, these pioneers embarked on a journey that would forever shape their lives and the history of the American West. Many pioneers banded together in wagon trains, creating communities on wheels that provided safety and support against the dangers of the trail. Their journey was fraught with challenges, from harsh weather and unforgiving terrain to scarce resources and the constant threat of disease, such as cholera and smallpox. Despite these hardships, the pioneers displayed incredible resilience and determination, pushing forward with unwavering hope. The experience of traversing the Oregon Trail became a defining chapter in their lives, shaping their identities, values, and the stories they would pass down to future generations. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity and forge a new path in the face of the unknown. Life after immigration. Upon reaching their destination in Oregon, many pioneers embraced the opportunity to cultivate the fertile land of the Willamette Valley. They established farms, planted crops like wheat, corn, and vegetables, and worked tirelessly to build new homes and communities. The early years were often challenging, requiring immense effort and resilience as they adapted to their new environment and established social structures. The descendants of these pioneers have continued to flourish in Oregon and beyond, carrying on the legacy of hard work and determination. While some families have maintained agricultural roots, others have branched out into diverse industries like timber, technology, and tourism. The impact of the Oregon Trail pioneers is deeply woven into the fabric of the region, visible in local culture, festivals that celebrate their heritage, and historical societies dedicated to preserving their stories. Their journey and the communities they built have left an enduring mark on the landscape and the identity of the American West. Descendants today. Today, the descendants of Oregon Trail pioneers carry a unique legacy, often expressing deep pride in their ancestors' journey and the values they embodied. Many actively participate in events that honor their heritage, such as reenactments, educational programs, and community efforts to preserve historical sites along the trail. They contribute to a vibrant cultural tapestry that reflects both the hardships and triumphs of their forebears. Values like perseverance, community spirit, and a profound connection to the land are often woven into their identities. In contemporary society, they may engage in important discussions about land use, environmental conservation, and the recognition of historical injustices. In essence, the Oregon Trail pioneers embarked on a journey that not only shaped their own lives but also laid the foundation for generations to come. Their descendants continue to honor this legacy, navigating the complexities of modern life while drawing strength and inspiration from the resilience and pioneering spirit of those who came before them. Their story is a reminder of the power of human determination and the enduring impact of a journey that transformed the American West. Packing for the Oregon Trail. Imagine yourself in the 1850s, ready to leave the East Coast behind and embark on a new life in the West. Your destination, Oregon, via the famed Oregon Trail. Your journey begins in Independence, Missouri, the starting point for many pioneers. Here you pack your covered wagon, not the large Conestoga wagons often depicted, but smaller, lighter ones called prairie schooners. These wagons became your mobile homes for the next 4 to 6 months. So packing efficiently was crucial. Thankfully, previous travelers had shared their wisdom, offering guidelines on essential provisions. When it came to food, a family of 3 was advised to bring a substantial amount, 5 barrels of flour, that's a whopping 1,080 pounds, along with 600 pounds of bacon for protein and fat. Coffee was also vital, with 100 pounds. Tea, sugar, rice, and dried fruit added variety and essential nutrients to their diet. Seasonings, including 50 pounds of salt and pepper, were crucial for making the often bland food more palatable. Baking soda, known as saleratus back then, was also included for baking. Other guides from that era recommended around 200 pounds of lard for cooking and preserving, along with dried beans and cornmeal for hearty meals. And of course, no pioneer wagon was complete without hardtack, a type of long-lasting cracker, with about 120 pounds stored away for emergencies. These provisions, carefully chosen and packed, were the lifeline of the pioneers, ensuring they had enough sustenance to survive the long and demanding journey west. 4th of July Feast. One meal that held special significance for the pioneers was their 4th of July feast. Not only was it a chance to celebrate a national holiday, but for many it also marked the halfway point of their journey. This called for a bit of a splurge, using up some of the more luxurious provisions they had left. In 1849, William Swain described a lavish 4th of July spread that included ham, beans cooked in various ways, biscuits, johnny cake, apple pie, sweet cake, rice pudding, pickles, vinegar, pepper sauce, mustard, coffee, sugar, and even milk. It sounds like a real feast. He noted that everyone enjoyed the meal, but the men went a bit overboard with the brandy toasts, celebrating until reason went out the window and brandy took over. Swain, however, claimed to have left the revelry after the 5 traditional toasts, disgusted by their behavior, and spent the rest of the day writing to his wife. Of course, we can't be sure if that's exactly how it went down. By this point in the journey, some wagon trains had already depleted their fancier supplies. George Keller described a less glamorous 4th of July dinner, consisting of musty hardtack and beef bones on the verge of rotting. Similarly, Amos Steck lamented that his 4th of July was just like any other day, spent driving a slow ox team through sandy roads with nothing but hardtack, and poor quality at that, for his midday meal. He admitted feeling little patriotic spirit, even on this important day. It's worth noting that these less fortunate meals were often experienced by wagon trains made up primarily of men, as it was the women who typically handled the cooking. James Hutchings expressed this sentiment, wishing he had learned the skills of a washerwoman, cook, and general housewife before embarking on the journey. It's a reminder of the important role women played in ensuring the pioneers' well-being and the challenges faced by those who lacked their domestic expertise. Camp sacrifice. As the journey wore on, the pioneers inevitably faced dwindling food supplies. The little delicacies they brought from home eventually disappeared, leaving them with only the basics: flour, bacon, beans, sugar, and tea. Like the Israelites in the desert, they grew weary of this monotonous diet and longed for fresh food. Their meals became increasingly meager as they traveled further. During this challenging time, the pioneers relied heavily on staples like buffalo jerky, hardtack, a type of hard cracker, and a curious concoction called portable soup. This involved boiling down meat and bones until they reduced to a gelatinous layer, which was then cut into pieces and dried. These dried pieces could later be added to water to create a simple broth, similar to a bouillon cube. Another option was meat biscuit, a concentrated food product that claimed to provide the same nutrition as 5 times its weight in fresh beef. It was advertised as a long-lasting and convenient food suppressed for travelers. The problem with dwindling food supplies wasn't just physical hunger, it also took a toll on their spirits. The daily grind of the journey could be monotonous and boring, and the prospect of a good meal often served as the highlight of their day. Eating became a source of comfort and joy, even in the harshest conditions. One pioneer described having breakfast in a snowstorm, noting that despite the gloomy surroundings, they maintained good spirits and devoured their snow-covered food with gusto, proving that even a blizzard couldn't dampen their appetites. These accounts highlight the vital role that food played in sustaining not just the pioneers' bodies, but also their morale throughout the long and challenging journey. As the pioneers continued their westward trek, they encountered another challenge: dwindling supplies of lemon extract. Lemon extract, along with a bit of sugar, was often added to their water to create a makeshift lemonade, masking the unpleasant taste of the often dirty water sources. Finding clean water was a constant struggle, especially on the dusty plains where everything, including their food and water, was coated in a layer of grime. To make the water somewhat potable, they sometimes used aluminum ammonium sulfate, which acted as a purifier, but it left the water with a terrible taste. When they ran out of this chemical, they resorted to adding cornmeal to the water, letting it settle for 20 to 30 minutes. As the cornmeal sank to the bottom, it would carry some of the dirt with it, leaving a slightly cleaner layer of water on top, though the taste was still far from ideal. The combination of dwindling food supplies, luxury items running out, and the difficulty of finding clean water made the Oregon Trail an increasingly harsh experience. And things were about to get even tougher as they approached Fort Laramie, nicknamed Camp Sacrifice. This fort was the last major stop before tackling the daunting Rocky Mountains. While crossing the Great Plains had been arduous, navigating the steep and rugged mountains would be even more challenging for the oxen and wagons. To prepare for this difficult leg of the journey, the pioneers had to lighten their loads, discarding anything deemed unnecessary. This meant getting rid of not just non-essential items like books and fine china, but sometimes even necessary supplies that were considered too heavy. One wagon train, desperate to reduce weight, abandoned a ton of bacon, several barrels of bread, and numerous tools like shovels, axes, and hoes, all worth nearly $1,500 at the time. Buffalo chips. Now, here's a fascinating fact. The pioneers relied on buffalo for more than just meat. They also used their droppings, known as buffalo chips, as fuel for their fires. You see, the Great Plains aren't exactly known for their abundance of trees, which meant firewood was scarce. So, the pioneers turned to a readily available resource: buffalo poop. Apparently, when dried, these chips burn quite well and don't produce much of an unpleasant smell. One pioneer described seeing women roaming the prairie with sacks, gathering buffalo chips for cooking their evening meals. Some wore gloves, but many simply used their bare hands, a testament to their resourcefulness and determination in the face of limited resources. It might sound a bit strange to us today, but using buffalo chips was a practical and essential solution for the pioneers, allowing them to cook their food and stay warm on the treeless plains. It just goes to show how adaptable and innovative they had to be to survive the challenges of the Oregon Trail. Cooking on the trail. With their buffalo chip fires blazing, it's time to explore the culinary skills of the pioneers. I'm truly amazed by their ability to create complex and delicious meals, especially during the early stages of the journey when they still had a good supply of ingredients. Fresh bread was a staple, and they had various ways to make it rise, either using baking soda, saleratus, the newfangled Preston's yeast powder, or even the ingenious salt-rising bread. Salt-rising bread is a fascinating example of pioneer ingenuity. Instead of relying on yeast, it uses bacteria to leaven the dough. The basic ingredients were water, salt, flour, and a bit of cornmeal or dried potato. This mixture, called a starter, needed to be kept warm throughout the day, so they'd place it at the front of the wagon, where the sun could warm it and encourage the bacteria to grow. By evening, the starter would be bubbly and ready to use in their fresh bread. Brilliant. But what impressed me even more is that they managed to bake pies and cakes on the trail. Letters from that era mention delicious creations like fresh antelope pot pie, pound cake, peat pie, and apple pie, although the apple pie often aced dried apples, which weren't always a crowd pleaser. There was even a saying at the time, "Spit in my ears and tell me lies, but give me no dried apple pies." It's clear that the pioneers valued good food and found ways to indulge their sweet tooth, even amidst the hardships of the journey. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the content above. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications to follow our videos. Thank you.
These Depression-era church recipes prove that creativity can turn the simplest ingredients into unforgettable comfort foods. If you enjoyed this glimpse into culinary history, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more fascinating food traditions. Happy cooking!